Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 11th of April 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit, with today's gaming news and comments. Coming up in the show, Bethesda's Vice President on the subject of Day 1 DLC, Dark Souls 2 PC version revealed, the delay to Rayman Legends reportedly resulting in 30 more levels, Project Eternity with its first in-game footage, and 2012 was a record year for buyouts and mergers, according to a Digi Capital report. Peter Hines, the Vice President of Bethesda, has spoken to OXM on the subject of DLC, and during their podcast addressed the subject of DLC that was released on Day 1. He said that while Bethesda doesn't actually do that, so it's hard for them to really comment, he also believes that the attitudes coming in from certain segments of the gaming audience don't really understand the development process. He went on to explain that the way that game development currently works is that the content people stop making new content a fair amount of time before it ships, and says it's not like the old days where it was like a day before or a week before, and as a result developers are put through the ringer by fans. He also claimed that while it takes a long time for them to develop stuff like Dawnguard and Dragonborn, if they could have created Dragonborn and put it out just as good 3 weeks after release, they probably would have. Huh, really? You would? That's a very odd thing to say. I can understand that you want the content out fairly quickly, and it's like, hey, this is great, we could put out a big $20 expansion like 3 weeks after the game, and then you suddenly realize, oh, this isn't a very good idea, because people just spent $60 on our game and can't really afford to spend another 3 short weeks afterwards, and they're nowhere near finishing the content anyway. And there's a reason why this stuff's spaced out mostly, because you can't just throw a bunch of content at someone and expect them to buy all of it. People have budgets they have to be concerned with. Spending $80 on one game in 1 month is a little bit more difficult. Now, onto his primary point. So, I have always disagreed with Day 1 DLC, and I do understand how games development works because I speak to a lot of developers. It's not really all that difficult. You can even read about it online. Yes, I know, there's a crazy thing called the internet. It's got information and everything. It's quite easy to educate yourself, really, on how things actually work. But when it comes down to Day 1 DLC, I don't believe it matters that the content creators are sitting around twiddling their thumbs. It's not about keeping them busy. Everyone is actually kind of fine with that. That's not really a big deal. The thing is that you can create that Day 1 DLC content and not sell it. You are going to be paying those people anyway. It is just price gouging. I don't see any way to honestly interpret it otherwise. It's not like you're spending extra money to make this content. These people are employed by you. They are paid a salary. They were going to get paid that salary regardless of whether or not they were actually making content for you. It doesn't cost you any extra to create this, unless you bring other people in on the task. Do you bring in contractors? Do you bring in people from other studios or something along those lines? Unlikely, and not according to what you've just said there. And what you're basically claiming is that the people that create the content stop when the game is content complete, and then the actual finishing of the game is not something they're really involved in. Alright, cool, I get that, but what is to stop you creating free DLC or a free add-on pack, a free piece of content that is ready to launch? There were quite a lot of games in the past that did that. In fact, there's plenty more besides today that just release free content afterwards because they believe it's a good way of selling more copies of the game, and they are right. Absolutely right. If you release a big content update, that is news, and that ends up selling more copies of the game. It could even push it back to the top of Steam if there's a big new update. It could pop up in that little window that says, hey, big update about your game, and so on and so forth. It also engenders a lot of consumer goodwill, and by the same logic of saying, oh, well, the content creators are doing this and not that, then you can also say, well, this content that you just made didn't cost you anything extra because these guys were going to be at the office anyway, so what is the harm in releasing it for free? No, the answer is that games want to make more money, and unfortunately, the thing about Day 1 DLC is that we just can't trust companies to actually do it in an honest way. We can't trust companies to say, huh, you know what would be really good? Let's start just slicing off pieces of this content right now. Let's try and figure out a way that we can monetize the stuff that we've already made beyond what we were doing in the first place. So, in reality, a $60 game becomes an $80 game, and so on and so forth, if you want to actually get all of that content. There are very few development houses, I'm afraid, that have proven that they are trustworthy with this kind of DLC practice. And DLC has got a pretty bad reputation. It has got the reputation for being rushed, it's got the reputation for being short, and it's got the reputation for being unreasonably expensive based on the amount of content that you actually receive. So forgive me if I don't believe that studios should be producing DLC to sell on day one with their game just because some of their content guys don't have anything to do with themselves. According to the Dark Souls 2 official website, we will be receiving a PC version of Dark Souls 2 on the same release day as the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 versions. This is a very good thing, of course. It's also followed up by the apparent announcement, or indeed non-announcement, that there will not be Games for Windows Live in this new version of the game. Unfortunately, we don't know this for sure because it's not officially confirmed as of yet. On the Dark Souls site, there is no Games for Windows Live logo, which is being interpreted as being a sign that there will not, in fact, be Games for Windows Live whatsoever. This is, of course, good news for a wide variety of different reasons, including the fact that Games for Windows Live caused a great deal of issues for a lot of people. It also meant that certain countries couldn't actually buy it legally at all because of the Games for Windows Live service agreement not being valid in certain countries, mostly Eastern Bloc. Games for Windows Live initially made the game much easier to port. However, as we saw, the port was not especially good, and a lot of modding had to be done in order to get it working properly. Now I would say that, especially if you have a controller, or even with some of the control mods with the keyboard and mouse, the game is very much playable and is very much worthwhile as well, because it is, of course, one of the finest difficult action RPGs that have ever been made. There's also 12 minutes of new gameplay, courtesy of an exclusive IGN reveal that I can't show you here due to copyright reasons, but it should be easy enough for you to find on YouTube. I think everyone's really hoping that the port for Dark Souls 2 will be significantly better than the original port for Dark Souls, even though, as I said, it was patched up. The launch release version of Dark Souls was pretty bad, quite frankly, and there have been a great deal of improvements made since then thanks to enterprising modders. However, I feel that this is something of a success story. If we were to look at the original campaign to get Dark Souls onto PC, which this channel was certainly a part of, then what you can see in terms of the reasoning is, even if the port isn't that good, supporting it anyway means that perhaps they will get a better version for the next game. We'll see the sequel come out on PC at release, and it will be a better version. And it looks like that's exactly what is happening. That said, let's not be too hasty here and believe that this will end up being a great port. We have no evidence whatsoever that that will be the case. From Software has a fairly poor reputation when it comes to ports, unfortunately, as do many Japanese software houses, although not all of them. There's this weird idea going around that Japanese companies just can't develop for PC. This is not remotely true by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of people seem to be forgetting Capcom as a pretty damn major firm involved in that kind of thing. But hopefully we will be seeing a good version of this coming over, and quite frankly I would call that a nice bit of success for that particular campaign. I think that's one of the best examples in recent memory of gamers coming together and actually asking for something in a calm, rational, and yet loud and passionate voice, and receiving a reward for their efforts. The delay to forthcoming Ubisoft title Rayman Legends may be paying dividends for those waiting for this particular title. The game, which was supposed to be a Wii U launch title, was pushed back significantly and then announced that it would be ported to other consoles by Ubisoft. This seems to be partially in response to complaints by fans that they did not want to purchase a Wii U exclusive, bearing in mind that Origins was on pretty much every system ever, and also a response to the fact that no one is buying the Wii U right now, which is something of a self-fulfilling prophecy, really. The reason they're not buying it is because there aren't enough good exclusive games on it. And there are no exclusive games on it because nobody is buying it. But hey, there you go. Now, according to an interview with official Nintendo magazine, Michael Ansel, the creator of Rayman, has said that the studio has been working pretty damn hard in the interim and has been creating new content. They have added 30 new levels and several new bosses as a result, and also polished the game significantly. The Rayman guys have expressed their disappointment on several occasions that the game will be delayed, regardless of the fact that it was almost finished, but it looks like this delay might result in an even better game. So, in this case, I think we're going to stick with the old Miyamoto quote that says, "A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad." Don't know if that's necessarily true in the days of online patching and DLC, but hey, you get the idea. Interestingly enough, that's a bunch of content that could have been sold as Day 1 DLC. Bethesda, what a great idea. And apparently these guys don't have that as a plan. Good. Good guys. And I'm looking forward to Rayman Legends, honestly. I think Rayman Origins was one of the only platformers that I've genuinely enjoyed in recent years. It's not a genre that I'm particularly into, but Origins is a damn good game. It's a really good-looking one as well, and apparently it did just well enough, no doubt, in no small part to the success of the mobile version Jungle Run, which is one of the best one-touch games on the iPad and iPhone as far as I'm concerned, to justify putting some serious effort into this particular sequel. I played an early demo on the Wii U, I enjoyed it very much, so we'll see. They're expecting this to come out sometime late September, which would mean that it's been delayed by almost a year, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. Hopefully it won't go down the lines of Duke Nukem Forever, but I have a feeling that that's not really going to be the case. Obsidian's forthcoming Project Eternity game has released its first piece of footage in its 49th developer update, showing off various pieces of interesting technology, as well as a scene that we did see originally as the first screenshot of the actual game, which displayed a waterfall as well as a bridge and an entrance to something flanked by two rather decayed statues. It shows off the isometric perspective of the game and also explains the various tricks that are used to make the game look the way that it is, as well as have a very low overhead. The game itself is actually two-dimensional. The whole thing is one gigantic facade. In some ways, very similar to the way that the games were made originally using the Infinity engine. This is a game that is in isometric perspective with a fixed perspective. The camera will be at a very specific angle. And as a result, it seems like they've been able to cram an awful lot of detail in there without needing a 100, 200, or 300 person team in order to make that kind of thing happen. Really, I think it is quite gorgeous. The lighting effects are absolutely phenomenal. I love the way that the waterfall looks as well, and the background textures, including the decayed statues and the bridge work, really does evoke the memory of the old Infinity Engine games like Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale. Seems like they're really staying true to their ideas, and their technology is kind of old school, but it's interesting to see that adapted in a modern setting. And quite frankly, I hope that we see more of that. I am a little bit worried about the future of games if we're going to end up spending a huge amount on designing these huge, open, expensive worlds, and then you don't end up selling the 20 million copies or whatever in order to make that money back. That's the kind of thing that could lead to a video game crash, not the sort of thing we're looking for. So sustainable business practices while still creating a very beautiful and extremely detailed world are the kind of things that we should be applauding. And finally, according to a report by the investment banking group Digi Capital, last year, 2012, was a record year for mergers and acquisitions within the games industry, with a raise of 22%, topping $4 billion in terms of costs. There were a number of fairly huge deals that caused this to occur, including Nexon buying 15% of NCSoft, which supposedly cost $685 million. Wow, really? $685 million for 15% of NCSoft? And obviously we're talking about shares here. They're getting that stake there, but that is a lot of money. That's a huge amount. NCSoft is clearly a gigantic, crazy company. They actually purchased 3.2 million shares from the CEO, so some crazy stuff there. Sony, of course, picked up Gaikai, which we then discovered was integral to the streaming technology of the PlayStation 4. That cost them $380 million. And we also had Nexon again, who apparently are flexing their financial muscles, acquiring Gloops, which is a mobile developer, for a significant amount of money, $468 million. So what is there to bring out of this story? Is Nexon, in fact, buying the entire games industry? That's certainly a possibility. Well, the other hand of what's been going on here is that gaming investment activity in 2012 took a rather large drop. actually dropped down to $868 million in total. In 2011, it was more than $1 billion. That's apparently a 56% drop. That is... ooh, that's a little bit worrying, certainly, got to say. This is attributed mostly to the so-called social bubble bursting and the massive overvaluation of Zynga and its subsequent difficulties, layoffs, and all manner of stuff. Apparently, this was bad enough to scare a lot of venture capitalists away from gaming entirely. Well, I guess it's bad news that these guys with the money are getting scared away, but you've got to bear in mind, if they were investing in stuff like Zynga, then I've got to really wonder if they actually knew what they were doing. The mobile market, to me, seems so incredibly volatile, and it's something that you wouldn't necessarily want to invest in, especially when you look at a company like Zynga. Zynga is successful because it steals other people's ideas. Farmville was hardly original, but it was the thing which originated cow clickers. But then if you look at all of their other stuff, it's actually kind of ridiculous. In Words with Friends, prime example of basically just stealing Scrabble. And then they bought OMG Pop that are responsible for Draw Something, which massively tanked in popularity afterwards, and all sorts of crazy stuff ended up happening in that regard. They made a bunch of bad decisions and arrogantly stole other people's ideas, then copied their own ideas over and over and over again. And half of their current games that are available are variants on Farmville. Let's go through their Ville games, shall we? Farmville, Farmville 2, Farmville Mobile, Castleville, Chefville, Cityville, Cityville Holiday Town, Cityville Hometown, Coasterville. Coasterville? What the balls is that? This is also a company that thought it was a good idea to develop a board game version of Words with Friends. What? That's Scrabble. They have a board game version of Draw Something. That's Pictionary. What the hell do you get off stealing other people's games? It's just... oh, God. And I'm sorry, I like to liven up the whole discussion of, yes, acquisitions are up and investor capital is down and so on and so forth. It's not really interesting. Talking about Zynga, on the other hand. But honestly, if you put a lot of money into a company like Zynga, you actually look at its portfolio and like, huh, this looks like a bubble waiting to burst, and that's exactly what ended up happening there. Not to mention their corporate culture is... vulture-like, to say the least. They seem to be a fairly immoral company, and certainly not a developer that I personally have any respect for whatsoever, and I would not be unhappy to see them implode. I'm just saying. You might think that it's bad for people to lose their jobs? Yes, but there are a lot of talented devs on Zynga that no doubt would prefer to be working for a company that didn't, in fact, base its entire business model on stealing other people's ideas. Alright folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the Content Patch, and I'll see you next time.